On the 3rd of March 1943, at this location, Bethnal Green Underground Station, occurred the single worst loss of life of civilians on the British mainland in World War II. 173 people were killed. Now, I remember reading in the Guinness Book of Records, if memory serves me correctly, that they were killed by panic. In fact, that's not true. It was a crush which happened probably when somebody tripped at the stairs at the bottom, then another person, then another person, then another person. And it was the weight of the bodies coming in that killed them. Here, if you look at this today, it's a wide open area. But then in 1943, it wasn't like this. It was a works entrance. The underground here hadn't been opened yet. It was being built. The tunnels were there. The platforms, everything was done, but it hadn't been finished off. This was covered, as you can see in this photograph, and there was only a small door to get in. So when people entered, and bear in mind there was a blackout, there was a 25 watt bulb only in here which lit it up, so as people came in they couldn't see what was happening down below. So some people got in and got down to the platforms normally, but others didn't, and they died in the darkness. In this video I shall look at how this happened, and at the same time at some of the myths surrounding this event. Bethnal Green is today on the central line of the London Underground. The Central London Railway, which became the Central Line in the 1930s, was opened in 1900, and by the beginning of World War II, the line extended to Ealing Broadway, as it does today. That's in the west, but at the east it ended at Liverpool Street. The New Works programme of 1935 to 1940, a project costing £42,286,000 in 1936, was amongst many other things to extend the Central Line from Liverpool Street to Stratford, and from there to connect it further, taking over existing lines to Epping, Ongar and Hainault, as it does today. Bethnal Green is the first station after Liverpool Street, but it was not yet ready when the war started. As a result of the war, all construction stopped on the London Underground, unlike in Moscow, where it actually continued during the war. The underground station and tunnels had, however, been dug, and thus they were available as an air raid shelter run by London County Council. The station as a shelter could host up to 10,000 people, although the maximum it held at any one time was 7,000. It had 5,000 bunks, a canteen, a sick bay with a trained nurse regularly in attendance, a visiting doctor, a concert hall capable of holding 300 people, and a public library with around 4,000 books. The reason it had so many books was because the local lending library had been hit by a bomb and the books moved there for storage. It needs to be pointed out, however, that there are almost 100,000 people living in the Bethnal Green area in 1939. However, the way into the shelter was not the wide open entrance we see today, but something more resembling the entrance to a works site, which in fact it still was. Inside, it had no handrails, the lighting was bad, only one 25 watt bulb at the entrance, and the timber slats which were used to form the concrete stairs had not yet been removed. The timber had rotted in the damp climate and thus made the stairs uneven, and this was to have tragic consequences. The East End, because of the docks as well as the industrial infrastructure, had been a target for the Luftwaffe since the first raid, which occurred on the night of Saturday the 24th of August 1940 to Sunday the 25th of August. From then on, during the Blitz, London was constantly bombed, with the East End taking the brunt. We can read of the opening of the air raid shelter at the future Bethnal Green tube station in an article published in the Sunday Mirror on the 6th of October 1940. The man who gets things done. Herbert Morrison, new Minister of Home Security, beloved by Londoners, is the man who gets things done. Standing on the platform of the uncompleted Bethnal Green underground station, 65 feet below ground yesterday, he asked London Passenger Transport Board and local council officials why it was not being used as a shelter. He was told that there were certain technical difficulties. Is there anything to stop the people using it right away? He queried. He was told that there was not. Then open it tonight, said Herbert Morrison. That is why several thousand men, women and children of the East End who last night found sanctuary in the station and tunnels, part of the new tube extension not yet in use, bless the name of Britain's liveliest cabinet minister. Anti-aircraft shells were bursting in the sky during an alert when Mr. Morrison and Admiral Sir Edward Evans arrived to inspect the station. Mr. Morrison, after chatting with the experts, reached his decision about the opening of the station as a shelter in 5 minutes. Council officials told him everything was ready to make the shelter comfortable. Someone said the pit in a concrete track should be boarded over. Let them sleep on the track, replied Morrison. Mr. Morrison said in an interview, you can tell the people we are going to utilise every inch of shelter we can find and we're going to do it very quickly. Herbert Morrison was born in 1888 and he was a Labour MP. He was Minister of Transport in the second Labour government until 1931 and then he became leader of London County Council. On the 12th of May 1940, shortly after becoming Prime Minister, Winston Churchill appointed him to be the first Minister of Supply. On the 4th of October 1940, he became the Home Secretary and Minister of Home Security, a role he held until the 23rd of May 1945. His main claim to fame, however, may be that the Morrison shelter, a more or less do-it-yourself air raid shelter, was named after him. In recent years, he has been partially blamed for the Bethnal Green disaster. Whereas the heavy bombing of London had stopped when the aircraft were moved to the east in support of the invasion of the Soviet Union, the risk of raids was always acute and the sight of what was believed to be an enemy plane could start off the sirens. The shelters became places of community life with sing-alongs, refreshments organised and public toilets, but with the unpleasant damp environment and the proximity of so many people, it could also be a place of bickering and strife. In September 1940, a bomb hit Marble Arch Station and killed 20 people. The following month, a bomb hit near Balham Underground Station on the Northern Line, creating a crater into which a bus fell, and as it fell, it hit a water pipe, which then caused a flood, causing the deaths of 111 people. In January 1941, a bomb hit Bank Station, killing 56 people and injuring 69. The station was forced to close for 2 months. Now to come to the events of the 3rd of March 1943. The newspapers had reported a major attack on Berlin on the night of the 1st to the 2nd of March 1943. This was the largest bombing attack so far in the war on the German capital, although March 1943 was to see 2 raids even larger, and as the war progressed, the raids themselves got larger. This could have produced the fear of a retaliatory raid. The cinemas had just closed and 3 buses had disgorged their passengers nearby. A large group of people went to the underground station when the air raid siren went off at 2017. The searchlights went on and an anti-aircraft battery a few hundred metres away in Victoria Park launched a salvo of anti-aircraft rockets at 2027. This has been reported as a secret weapon. I don't think it was, but the locals, who had not heard its noise before, believed that they were under attack. They pushed to get into the shelter quickly, unaware of what the noise really was. There was no air raid warden or police officer on duty. As mentioned earlier, the stairs were uneven and, to make it even worse, were wet from the rain. It appears that a lady holding a baby tripped at the bottom of the stairs in the half-light of the single 25-watt bulb. People tripped over her, and in the badly lit stairwell with pushing from behind in the haste to get into the station caused others to trip, and others, and others, and others. It sounds like something out of a comedy film, but it was utterly deadly. As a result, in an area measuring around 15 square meters, some 300 people were crushed. 173 of them were killed, 27 men, 84 women, and 62 children. 90 people were injured. More than 60 had to be taken to hospital. That night, not a single bomb fell on London. Some people had made it out of the passageway, but they were unable to get back. When the extent of what had happened was obvious, someone took control of the situation and stopped people going into the shelter. A policeman got some children to hold hands together and stop the passing traffic. Adults pulled out the dying and the dead. Their accounts of the deaths of some people are harrowing, with injuries that one would not normally associate with asphyxiation. The dead and dying were laid out on the pavement. Mirrors were put in front of their mouths and noses to see if they were still breathing. Vehicles took the confirmed dead to the morgue. The injured were rushed to hospital. In this photograph published in the Illustrated London News, we can see repairs being made following the accident. The timber edgings are being removed, handrails have been added, as have painted white lines. This was done the following day. In Bethnal Green at War, a 16-page booklet published after the war, we read, "The Home Secretary Herbert Morrison ordered a full inquiry into the circumstances of the accident, and this was conducted by London Magistrate Lawrence Rivers Dunn. The inquiry was held from the 11th to the 17th of March, and 80 witnesses were questioned. His conclusion that this disaster was caused by a number of people losing their self-control at a particular unfortunate place and time, and that no forethought of the matter of structural design or practical police supervision can be any real safeguard against the effects of a loss of self-control by a crowd. The surest protection must always be that self-control and practical common sense is displayed. This has hitherto prevented the people of this country becoming the victims of countless similar disasters." In other words, the magistrate was blaming the victims themselves. Another official statement took a different approach. According to accounts so far received, shortly after the air raid alert sounded, substantial numbers of people were making their way, as usual, towards the shelter entrance. There were nearly 2,000 in the shelter, including several hundred who had arrived after the alert, when a middle-aged woman, burdened with a bundle and a baby, tripped near the foot of a flight of 19 steps, which leads down from the street. This flight of steps terminates on a landing. Her fall tripped an elderly man behind her, and he fell similarly. Their buddies again tripped up those behind them, and within a few seconds a large number were lying on the lower steps and the landing, completely blocking the stairwell. Those coming in from the street could not see what had taken place and continued to press down the steps, so that within a minute there were about 300 people crushed together and lying on top of one another, covering the landing and the lower steps. By the time it was possible to extricate the bodies, it was found that a total at present estimated at 178 had died, and that a further 60 were in need of hospital treatment. Statements from a large number of eyewitnesses and members of the police and civil defence services make it clear that there was no sign of panic before the accident on the stairs. No bombs fell anywhere in this district during the evening. Preliminary reports received by the Home Secretary and Minister of Home Security indicate that police, wardens, soldiers, women's voluntary service and civilians worked hard and well to rescue the victims. Mr. Morrison has instituted the fullest inquiries to establish in greater detail what took place and to see whether any structural or administrative weaknesses have been brought to light. However, this official statement was not made public, and the incident was largely covered up for the sake of civilian morale. Newspapers did report on the disaster, but did not give the true number of casualties. However, the true number of casualties must have been quite obvious to anyone in the area because of the amount of funerals at local churches. A public inquiry was held when the war ended, and this found that the disaster had been caused by the lack of proper supervision by the air raid wardens, inadequate lighting, and a lack of handrails, as well as a lack of crush barriers. However, there was a shortage of manpower caused by the needs of the military and industry, there was a blackout, and there was a shortage of materials. All of these factors combined with the timing and the firing of the rockets. Indeed, there was no enemy bombardment of Bethnal Green until the 13th of June 1944, when a flying bomb fell in Grove Road. Over the next few months, 19 more V-1 flying bombs hit Bethnal Green. In November 1944, a V-2 rocket hit Lesada Street. In February 1945, another V-2 rocket hit Parmeter Street, and a third hit in March 1945 just outside the borough boundary at Valence Road, later to be made famous as the home of the gangsters, the Cray Twins. According to Bethnal Green's Ordeal, a booklet published in 1946 and one of the sources of this presentation, over 80 tons of bombs hit the district, over 15 tons of which did not explode on impact. With this statistic alone, we can imagine the extent of the long-term damage that World War II brought and continues to bring across Europe. As recently as 2007, a major unexploded bomb was found in Bethnal Green. This is Victoria Park in Bethnal Green. It's about, a kilometre or so from the tube station. The Z battery was placed somewhere where I am now, somewhere around here. This was not a secret weapon as has often been stated. The Z battery was first used in cities in Cardiff in 1940. It was deployed in Merseyside as well. But I think that this was, as far as the locals around here were concerned, a secret weapon. Secret as in unknown. Of course, all weapons to a certain extent are secret. So when the Z battery fired, they had never heard the noise of these rockets screeching through the air before. A Z battery, a short-range anti-aircraft system which fired 76mm rockets from ground-based single and multiple launchers. This weapon had been developed in the late 1930s and had been enthusiastically backed by Winston Churchill for the Navy when he was First Lord of the Admiralty at the outbreak of war. By June 1940, when Churchill was Prime Minister, he requested large supplies of projectors for anti-aircraft defence. The weapon worked by bringing down low-flying aircraft with a trailing wire, at the end of which was a high-explosive warhead detonated by a specially designed photoelectric proximity fuse. The rocket was propelled by a special solvent-free cordite. In October 1940, an experimental Z battery became operational at Cardiff. Further use at Merseyside showed that the best results were obtained by firing in salvos. The first victory was achieved in September 1940 in an attack on RAF Kenley between Purley and Caterham to the south of London. The base was attacked by Dornier Do-17 bombers. One aircraft was brought down using a salvo of 25 rockets that deployed a barrage of 150-metre cables suspended on parachutes. From early 1942, Z batteries were delivered to the Home Guard as the equipment was comparatively simple to operate and the rounds were light enough to be loaded by older men, as can be seen in these photographs from Merseyside. I think that it's logical to believe that the sound of these rockets being fired as a salvo was enough to cause the people at Bethnal Green to believe that they were under attack. However, the fact that they did not recognise the sound does not make it a secret weapon. Why would they fire these rockets over the park? That I really don't know. Maybe they thought they saw a target, or maybe it was a practice run. Let's face it, it makes far more sense to fire off 1,000 rockets in practice and use just one to bring down an enemy plane than the other way round. It may sound as being irresponsible to fire these rockets at this time. Well, I suppose that could be an argument, but I must return to the argument about practice. But the short answer is, I don't know why the rockets were fired. I don't even know if that was the cause of the noise 100%, although I believe it to be. All reports state that the disaster occurred when a lady carrying a baby tripped and fell. As there were no eyewitnesses who survived, it's difficult to know where this comes from. The only thing I can suggest is from the position of the bodies. In the book Mr. Morrison's Conjuring Tricks, the author Rick Fountain notes that in 1941 the local council had written to the government asking for permission to alter the station entrance and make it safer if a lot of people wanted to use it. The government department refused, and the borough engineer wrote a stronger worded letter explaining that the entrance and stairway needed several measures to make them safer. Again, permission was refused. The council's borough engineer wrote a third time to plead for permission to alter the entrance. This was mostly refused, but permission to use recycled wood to shore up the entrance was granted. The day after the disaster, all the measures sought by the council were put in place. However, Bethnal Green Council was made to keep their earlier letters secret under the Official Secrets Act. Statements given in Parliament after the secret official inquiry had taken place hinted that the victims were to blame. This ensured the event was kept as secret as possible. There are two reasons for this. It was designed to stop nuisance attacks by the Luftwaffe, as well as to keep up morale. The RAF shortly afterwards started its own policy of what I would term nuisance raids, where a single mosquito could fly over Germany, imitating attacks, and could send as many as 10 million people into the air raid shelters. This had the benefit of keeping people awake who might otherwise be asleep, resting for a day of war work. The mayor of Bethnal Green, Margaret Bridger, was largely blamed for the tragedy, although as we have seen, the opening of the station as an air raid shelter was ordered by Herbert Morrison and permission to make it safer had been denied. Indeed, 2 years after the disaster in 1945, when the final statement about the report was read out in Parliament, Herbert Morrison had a cold, and thus no questions about it could be put to him. There are those that claim that this was the greatest civilian disaster of the Second World War. That is not true. Far from it. What it is, however, is the greatest civilian disaster in one place at one time on the British mainland during the war. Here we have a memorial that was put up quite recently to recall the events here at Bethnal Green of the 3rd of March 1943. The wooden teak, I believe it is, memorial at the top, is meant to be a mould according to the architect who thought up the idea of the steps, as though the steps were put inside this mould. The memorial itself took quite a long time to actually do and to raise the cash for it. Indeed, they started this off without even having the cash, something I would advise nobody to do who is going to build anything like this. I worked in the real estate industry, real estate finance, and I can say that you would never do that unless you had the finance guaranteed. You don't have to have it in the bank, but you need it guaranteed one way or the other. Anyway, they did that. They did the white bit without putting the wooden bit on top, thinking that if people saw that they were serious about doing a memorial, then more donations would actually come. There's a link below to it, and also to the website of the organisation which has done this. So it's rediscovered wood, so I presume that means it's been recycled. Here on the memorial we've got the comments from some of the survivors, but there's one in particular I think I will show you. I won't show you the lot, but you can see on the website. And May Hutchinson was brought out alive by her husband, a stretcher bearer, but her children, Joan and William, were not so lucky. My sister could not live with the loss of her children and took her own life soon thereafter. Tom Moss. Alf Morris was one of the people who'd been very much involved in the building of this memorial. I was trapped on the third stair from the bottom, shouting for help. Air Raid Warden Mrs. Chumbley grabbed me by my hair, then under my arms. She finally pulled me free. My aunt Lillian Hall came down to the bunks a little later, tattered and bruised, as instructed. We said nothing to anyone all night. If I come over here, we can see some of the names. I'm not going to read them all out, but I'm just going to give sort of a little demonstration. See how many names are the same. Mary Bailey, Rose Bailey, for example. Perhaps that's mother and daughter. I don't know. Here, Annie Hall, Edna Hall, Irene Hall, Mary Hall. I suspect these two are sisters, and the mother and the aunt. That's what I suspect. I don't know. There we have Lillian Hoy, Louisa Hoy, probably mother and daughter. Joan Hutchinson, William Hutchinson, brother and sister. Here we have 3 stretchers. So Rose Stretch, age 39, William Stretch, senior, age 49, and what I presume is the son, William Stretch, junior, aged 9. If we look above, we can see that there is holes in the monument. Each hole represents a victim, and at certain times of the day, light comes through, and that is the light at the end of the tunnel. The light at the end of this tunnel. In 1975, there was a program called It'll Be a Lovely Day Tomorrow, which I actually saw on the television at the time. Now, it's often said that a lot of Londoners don't know about what happened in the underground station, which is just behind me. Now, I do find that somewhat difficult to believe. If I, as a child, knew what happened and I watched that program 48 years ago and I can remember it, I suspect that it's not as badly known as many people think. I did see, however, Sadiq Khan say, the Mayor of London, say that he knew nothing about it until quite recently. On the other hand, I do think it's really good that this monument has been put up, which is somewhere behind me, and that sort of does remind people of what can happen in war. Over the past year, I've spent a great deal of time in Ukraine, and I have seen myself, I haven't seen panic as such, but I've seen what happens when people go into shelters and it's completely dark. Nowadays, of course, they're lit up by the lights from mobile phones. But it is quite odd when you actually go into a shelter, or indeed, for example, when I came off the train the first time at Kiev, then we went into a tunnel and there was no lights whatsoever. Or indeed getting on the train at Kiev, and then there's no lights in the railway station, and the trains themselves they do have some of the emergency lights are on, but other than that, nothing. Obviously this is designed to stop I don't know what in today's, because we have GSM and all sorts of other coordinates and missiles, and can find where they're going to go. As far as what happened here is concerned, there's a number of things we'd have to remember. There's the blackout, it had been raining, there'd been lots of people, and all of these things together contributed to the disaster. I hope you found this video interesting. My specialist subject is Second World War, in particular it's the Holocaust. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours Central European time, so that would be at 7 o'clock in the evening here in the UK. I am based mainly in Poland and in Germany, although I do now have an address in Ukraine as well. So if you want to know more or see more videos, then please subscribe. But for the moment, all the best from me in Bethnal Green, London.